Ever wonder if it's truly possible to teach an old dog new tricks, especially when that old dog is stubbornly convinced he knows best? Well, let me tell you, after more than a few decades on this planet, and a good chunk of them married to Karen, I thought I was pretty set in my ways. And then came the van. Our beloved, sometimes infuriating, always surprising, four-wheeled home we named the Wanderer. It's whisked us away from the predictable cadence of suburban life and plunged us headfirst into the glorious, messy, unpredictable adventure of van life after 50. And it's out here, on the open road, somewhere in the misty highlands of Scotland, that I had to concede one of the most significant defeats of my marital career. Karen was right. And boy, did I hate to admit it. The day started like many others in the highlands that autumn, wrapped in a thick, pearly mist that clung to everything, making the world feel soft-focused and mysterious. We'd found a cracker of a spot the night before, a little pull-off overlooking a loch whose name I couldn't pronounce but whose beauty was undeniable, even shrouded as it was. The air had a bite to it, the kind that seeps into your bones if you're not careful. "Coffee's on, sleepyhead," Karen's voice chirped from the tiny galley kitchen. She was already bustling, a blur of cozy jumper and determined energy. I groaned, pulling the duvet further up. Is the world still out there, or has the mist swallowed us whole? Still here, she laughed, handing me a steaming mug. And it's promised to clear up by mid-morning. Perfect for that hike up to the old man of store, don't you think? Ah, the hike. That was the plan. A challenging trek, but with views reputed to make your soul sing. My soul felt like it was still tucked warmly in bed, but I nodded. Sounds good. Just hope this chill doesn't follow us up the mountain. This is where the seed of my eventual, reluctant capitulation was sown. Months ago, during the van conversion, a process that nearly led to several international incidents within our marriage, Karen had been adamant about a particular diesel heater. Not just any diesel heater, mind you. This was the whisper quiet, ultra-efficient, warms your socks from 3 feet away model. It was also, predictably, the more expensive model, and the one that required a bit more fiddly installation. "Mark, trust me on this," she'd said, eyes earnest, pointing at a brochure filled with glowing testimonials. "Imagine being snowed in somewhere, or coming back from a freezing hike. This will be our sanctuary." The standard one is fine, Karen, I'd argued, ever the pragmatist, ever mindful of the budget that seemed to expand like a startled pufferfish. We're not planning on conquering the Arctic. A bit of chill builds character. Famous last words, as they say. We'd compromised, or rather, Karen had patiently worn down my resistance with a series of well-reasoned arguments and perhaps a strategically deployed tear or two. She denies this, but I have my suspicions. We got the fancy heater. And along with it, she'd insisted on an extra layer of insulation, a special reflective kind that I'd grumbled about wrestling into the van's awkward cavities. "Overkill," I'd muttered, more than once. "We'll be sweating buckets." Now, sipping my coffee, the memory of those debates felt distant, almost amusing. Almost. The current chill, however, was very present. We layered up, thermal underwear, fleece jackets, waterproof outer shells. I packed extra socks, a thermos of hot tea, and a map that looked like a plate of spaghetti. "Ready?" Karen asked, zipping up her own jacket, a look of eager anticipation on her face. She thrives on this stuff, the fresh air, the challenge, the promise of a breathtaking view. Me? I thrive on a comfortable chair and a good book, but I'd learned that her kind of thriving often led to unforgettable moments for both of us. The initial part of the trail was deceptively gentle, winding through a managed forest, the scent of pine and damp earth filling our lungs. The mist was beginning to thin, shafts of pale sunlight occasionally breaking through, painting the landscape in ethereal hues. It was, I had to admit, quite beautiful. "See?" Karen said, nudging me with her elbow. "Worth getting out of bed for." "The jury's still out on that one," I replied, but there was a smile tugging at my lips. The air, though cold, was invigorating. As we climbed higher, the terrain became more rugged. The path narrowed, strewn with loose rocks and tangled roots. The wind, which had been a mere whisper in the sheltered woods, now began to assert itself, whipping around us with an icy ferocity. It carried with it a fine, stinging rain that wasn't heavy enough to be a downpour, but persistent enough to be thoroughly annoying. My initial good cheer started to wane. My nose was running, my fingers, despite the gloves, were beginning to feel like icicles, and the promised spectacular views were still stubbornly hiding behind a curtain of swirling gray cloud. Bit more challenging than the brochure implied, eh? I grumbled, pulling my hat down further over my ears. Karen, bless her adventurous heart, just grinned. Adds to the character, remember, she quipped, throwing my own words back at me. I shot her a look, which only made her laugh. We pressed on, the path growing steeper. We passed a few other hikers, some looking as determined as Karen, others looking as miserable as I felt. One couple, huddled behind a large boulder, were visibly shivering, their lightweight jackets clearly no match for the Scottish elements. Poor things, Karen murmured, as we passed them. They look frozen. I grunted in agreement, a small, selfish part of me noting that our gear, at least, seemed to be holding up. Thanks, in no small part, to Karen's meticulous research on all-weather clothing. Another point to her, I suppose, though I wasn't keeping score. Officially. The wind howled, and the rain, which had been content to merely prickle, now decided to get serious. It lashed against us, driven sideways, finding every tiny gap in our waterproofs. The temperature seemed to plummet. Okay, Karen shouted over the wind, her usual enthusiasm slightly dampened. Maybe this isn't ideal weather for sightseeing. We found a slightly sheltered overhang, more of a dent in the rock face than a proper cave, and huddled together, sipping the hot tea from the thermos. It was a brief respite, but the cold was relentless. My feet were starting to feel numb. What do you think? I asked, looking at her. Push on, or tactical retreat? Karen looked up towards the obscured summit, then back at me. Her face was red from the wind, her hair plastered to her forehead. Even she looked a bit defeated by the sheer unpleasantness of it all. You know, for once, I think the warm van sounds more appealing than a view I can't even see. Let's head back. The mountain will still be here another day. Relief washed over me, so potent it was almost warming. Best idea you've had all day, I said, trying not to sound too eager. The descent was, if anything, trickier than the climb. The path was now slick with rain, the loose stones treacherous underfoot. We took it slow, concentrating on each step, the wind still trying its best to push us off balance. The conversation dwindled, replaced by the squelch of our boots and the rhythmic tap-tap of Karen's walking poles. My mind, however, was already racing ahead to the van. I pictured the kettle whistling, a change into dry clothes, and maybe, just maybe, that fancy heater earning its keep. The thought was a small beacon of hope in the gray, blustery misery. Getting back to the Wanderer felt like reaching an oasis after a desert trek, albeit a very cold, wet desert trek. We were soaked through, chilled to the bone, and frankly, a bit grumpy. The cheerful anticipation of the morning had been thoroughly washed away. Right, Karen said, shaking herself like a wet dog as soon as we stumbled inside, dripping onto the small doormat she insisted we use. Operation Defrost is now in effect. This was where Karen's meticulous planning, the stuff I'd often rolled my eyes at, began to shine. She had a system for everything. Wet boots went into a designated waterproof tray just inside the door. Soaked jackets and trousers were hung on special quick-drying hooks she'd installed near one of the air vents. Okay, Mr. Skeptic, she said, a playful glint in her eye despite her chattering teeth. Let's see if your character-building chill can withstand the power of German engineering. She flipped a switch on the control panel for the diesel heater. There was a soft whir, a gentle click, and then, nothing. For a moment, my heart sank. Had all that expense, all those arguments, been for naught? Was I about to get the grim satisfaction of saying, I told you so, even as my toes threatened to fall off from frostbite. But then, a faint warmth began to emanate from the vents. It was subtle at first, barely perceptible. Karen was busy stripping off her wet layers, handing me dry clothes from the overhead lockers, another of her organizational triumphs, where everything had its place, easily accessible even in our cramped quarters. I peeled off my own sodden garments, my fingers clumsy with cold. The initial relief of being out of the wind and rain was immense, but the deep chill in my bones remained. "Give it a minute," Karen said, already pulling on a thick, fluffy sweater. "It's not instantaneous, but it's efficient." I was dubious. I'd experienced my share of feeble heaters in various accommodations over the years, heaters that promised much and delivered little more than a lukewarm sigh. But as we changed, the gentle warmth began to build. It wasn't a blast of hot air, like some aggressive industrial dryer. It was a pervasive, encompassing warmth that seemed to seep into the very fabric of the van. The chill that had clung to me like a second skin started, slowly but surely, to recede. I sat on the bench seat, rubbing my hands together, feeling the sensation return to my fingers. The windows, which had been fogged up from our steamy breath and the dampness, began to clear, revealing the dramatic scene outside, rain lashing against the glass, the lock churned into whitecaps by the wind. It looked utterly inhospitable out there. Yet, inside the Wanderer, a small miracle was occurring. The air grew perceptibly warmer, cozier. The dampness that had permeated everything began to dissipate. Karen, already looking much more comfortable, was humming as she started to prepare some soup. I looked around our little haven. The reflective insulation I'd grumbled about was clearly doing its job, holding that precious heat inside. The diesel heater, far from being the noisy, fuel-guzzling beast I'd half expected, was indeed whisper-quiet, just a faint, reassuring murmur in the background. The aroma of soup began to fill the van, mingling with the clean, dry warmth. I leaned back, wiggling my toes, which were now pleasantly tingling instead of painfully numb. It was astonishing. We had gone from feeling like drowned rats to being snug as bugs in a very well-appointed rug, all in the space of about 20 minutes. Karen ladled steaming soup into bowls. The rich scent of tomato and herbs was an added layer of comfort. She handed me a bowl, her eyes twinkling. "Well?" she asked, a hint of challenge in her tone. "Still think a bit of chill builds character." I took a spoonful of soup. It was hot, delicious, and deeply satisfying. The warmth spread through me, chasing away the last vestiges of the mountain's icy grip. I looked at her, at our cozy, dry, warm sanctuary, while outside the storm continued to rage. The heater purred contentedly. Our damp clothes, hanging nearby, were already beginning to feel less sodden. A slow smile spread across my face. It was time to face the music. "All right," I said, the words feeling surprisingly difficult to get out. "You were right." Karen paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "I'm sorry, what was that?" "The wind is still quite loud." I didn't quite catch it, there was no mistaking the triumphant mischief in her eyes now. I chuckled, shaking my head. "You heard me. You were right. About the heater. About the insulation. About all of it. This thing is magnificent." I gestured around the van. "We'd be miserable right now without it. Probably huddled in our sleeping bags, teeth chattering, eating cold sandwiches." Her smile broadened into a full, radiant beam. "It is pretty great, isn't it?" she said, not smugly, but with genuine pleasure. "I just knew it would make a difference. Especially on days like this." "A difference?" I exclaimed. "Karen, this isn't just a difference, this is the difference between abject misery and, well, this," I gestured to our warm, fragrant, comfortable space. "This is luxury. This is civilization in the face of a Scottish gale." We ate our soup in comfortable silence for a few moments, the only sounds the gentle hum of the heater and the drumming of rain on the roof. It was one of those moments where the simple things, warmth, food, shelter, felt like the greatest gifts in the world. I will admit, I continued, feeling a strange sense of liberation in the confession, I was a complete naysayer about that heater. I thought you were being extravagant. Fussy, even. Fussy? She raised an eyebrow. Moi. Okay, maybe thorough is a better word, I conceded. But I genuinely didn't think we needed something this robust. I figured we'd just tough it out. You know, stiff upper lip and all that. Karen reached across the small table and patted my hand. Mark, my love, we're in our 50s. Our stiff upper lip days are for impressing the grandkids, not for enduring unnecessary discomfort when we're trying to enjoy our hard-earned freedom. The whole point of this van life adventure is to live fully, remember? And for me, living fully includes being warm and dry. I had to laugh. She had me there. Completely and utterly. I hate to admit it when you're right, you know, I said, only half joking. I know, she replied, her eyes soft. That's what makes it so much fun when you finally do. The storm raged outside for the rest of the afternoon, a wild symphony of wind and water. But inside the Wanderer, we were an island of calm and comfort. We read, we talked, we listened to the radio. The fancy diesel heater, Karen's folly as I'd secretly, and unfairly, nicknamed it during its installation, became Karen's triumph. And I, the reformed skeptic, was its newest, most ardent disciple. It was more than just being warm, it was the feeling of security, of having created a truly functional and comfortable home, no matter what the elements threw at us. It was a testament to her foresight, and a lesson for me in trusting her instincts, even when they clashed with my own ingrained pragmatism. As evening drew in, the rain finally began to subside, though the wind still sighed around the van. Karen was knitting, a complicated pattern of blues and grays that reminded me of the lock outside. I was nursing a small glass of whiskey, feeling utterly content. You know, I said, breaking the comfortable silence, this whole van setup, it's a constant learning curve, isn't it? Karen looked up, a thoughtful expression on her face. It really is. Every modification, every system we put in, it's all been a bit of an experiment. Some things work brilliantly, like our little heater friend here, she patted the wall near a vent affectionately. Others, well, let's just say the solar-powered fairy lights were perhaps not my most practical idea for the Scottish Highlands in autumn. We both chuckled at the memory of those tiny, anemic lights struggling to produce a discernible glow during a particularly overcast week. But that's the beauty of it, I think, she continued. We're figuring it out together. We bring different perspectives. You're brilliant with the mechanics, the route planning, the how does this thing actually work side of things. And you, I countered, are the queen of comfort, practicality, and making sure we don't freeze to death or starve because I forgot to pack snacks. It's teamwork, she said simply. Like that hike today. Even though it didn't go as planned, we made the call together to turn back. And we got back here, and this is good. I swirled the whiskey in my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the soft light from our LED lamps. I was genuinely resistant to spending that extra money on the heater, Karen. I saw it as an indulgence. And I saw it as an investment, she replied. An investment in our well-being, in our ability to enjoy this lifestyle for longer, in more varied conditions. Think of all the shoulder season travel it opens up for us, the places we might have avoided if we knew we'd be cold. She had a point. A very good, well-insulated, efficiently heated point. It's not just about the money, though, is it? I mused. It's about, well, sometimes it's hard for me to see the value in something until I experience it. I'm more of a show me, don't tell me kind of guy. And I'm more of a, let me research this obsessively for 6 months and present you with a color-coded binder of evidence, kind of woman, she laughed. A terrifyingly accurate description, I agreed. But it works. Your research, your insistence, it pays off. Today was a prime example, I paused, then added, more seriously, I'm glad you pushed for it. And I'm sorry I was such a grump about it. Karen put down her knitting and smiled warmly. Apology accepted, though not entirely necessary. We all have our blind spots. Mine usually involve underestimating how long it takes to get anywhere or how many pairs of shoes one actually needs in a van. Hey, my 3 pairs are essential. I protested weakly, knowing full well one pair rarely left its storage box. The point is, she said, her tone gentle, we balance each other out. This van, this life, it's a shared dream. And sometimes, one of us sees a part of that dream a little more clearly than the other, and we have to trust each other enough to follow that vision, even if it seems a bit overkill at first. That phrase, overkill at first, resonated with me. How many times had I dismissed an idea, hers or even my own, because it seemed too much, too complicated, too unconventional? Van life, we were discovering, was often about embracing the unconventional. It was about customizing our lives, not just our vehicle, to fit our needs and desires, not some pre-packaged notion of how things should be. This is exactly why we decided to do this, isn't it? I said, looking around our cozy interior. To break free from the shoulds and figure out what actually works for us, for Karen and Mark, version 20, the post-50, adventure-seeking edition. Karen nodded. Precisely. It's not just about seeing new places, though that's a huge part of it. It's about challenging ourselves, learning new skills, and yes, sometimes admitting when we were wrong. She gave me a pointed look, softened by affection. A skill I am clearly still mastering, I admitted with a wry grin. But today was a good lesson. A very warm, very comfortable lesson. The experience highlighted something fundamental about our journey, something beyond the practicalities of camper van components. It was about partnership, about the give and take, the listening and, occasionally, the gentle insistence required to navigate not just roads and weather, but also each other's personalities and perspectives. We'd been married for over 30 years, built a life, raised a family. We knew each other inside out, or so we thought. But this new chapter, this life on wheels, was revealing new layers, new strengths, new areas where we could learn and grow, both as individuals and as a couple. The ability to create such a sanctuary, a warm, dry, inviting space in the midst of a Highland gale, felt like a metaphor for what we were trying to build in this phase of our lives: resilience, comfort, and joy, crafted from shared experiences and mutual support. It wasn't always easy. There were days of frustration, of cramped quarters leading to frayed tempers, of things breaking at the most inconvenient times. But then there were days like this, or moments like this, when a well-thought-out plan came together perfectly, when a challenge was overcome, and the simple act of being warm and dry felt like a profound victory. I thought about the couple we'd seen on the trail, shivering behind the rock. I hoped they'd made it back to somewhere warm. And I felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the heater, but for Karen's persistence, for her vision of what our life on the road could be, not just an escape, but a comfortable, sustainable adventure. You know, I said, a little later, as the last of the daylight faded, leaving us in the soft glow of the van's interior lights, I think this calls for a celebratory biscuit. The fancy shortbread ones we were saving. Karen's eyes lit up. An excellent suggestion. To Karen's triumphant heater, she declared, raising an imaginary glass. To Karen's triumphant heater, I echoed, and to always listening to your wife, eventually. She laughed, a lovely, hearty sound that filled our small, warm world. I'll have that embroidered on a pillow. The next morning, the world outside the Wanderer was transformed. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky scrubbed clean, a brilliant, almost painful blue. The air was crisp and cold, but invigorating, and the views across the loch, now unobscured, were breathtaking. Every droplet of water on every blade of grass glittered in the bright sunlight. Well, look at that, Karen said, peering out the window as the kettle whistled. The old man of store might get a visit from us yet. I stretched, feeling remarkably refreshed. The van was still pleasantly warm from the residual heat of the night, a gentle embrace rather than the stuffy fog I'd once feared. Perhaps, I said. Though I have to say, a lazy morning with coffee and that view doesn't sound too bad either, especially now that we know we can retreat to our 5-star mobile sauna if things get dicey. Karen smiled. It's good to have options, isn't it? As we sat there, sipping our coffee, watching the light change on the mountains, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Yesterday's aborted hike, the wind, the rain, it all felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the warmth and comfort that followed. And the lesson, of course. The lesson in humility, in trust, and in the undeniable wisdom of my wife when it came to certain creature comforts. It was a small thing, a diesel heater in a van. But it represented something much larger. It was about the choices we were making, the life we were building, piece by piece, decision by decision. It was about learning to rely on each other in new ways, to appreciate the different strengths we brought to this shared adventure. Van life after 50 wasn't just about ticking off destinations on a map, it was about the journey itself, the internal landscapes we navigated as much as the external ones. It was about recognizing that even after all these years, there were still new things to learn about the world, and about each other. So, yes, Karen was right. And while a part of my stubborn old dog brain still bristled slightly at the admission, a much larger, wiser part was incredibly grateful. Grateful for her foresight, grateful for the warmth, and grateful for the reminder that sometimes, the best adventures are the ones that come with a side of humble pie, preferably served in a very cozy, well-heated camper van. And as we continue this journey, living fully, 1 mile and 1 story at a time, I have a feeling there will be more lessons, more laughter, and hopefully, many more warm nights, no matter what the weather throws our way. I might even start listening to her suggestions the first time around. Maybe.